Welcome to my review of the film Memories of a Teenager. I'll be going through some plot, a couple of themes or big issues, big um, mentions within the film, and then my overall thoughts on the film. My bad, folks. I don't know why this is not pressing. Okay, guess I'll just do it like this. So about the film, Memories of a Teenager or Yo Adolescente is an Argentinian film that was released in 2019, but the film itself is set in 2005. The film was written and directed by Lucas Santa Anna and was based on a novel by Nicolas Zamorano. The film stars Renato Guidaro as Zabo, Thomas Lebra as Tomas, Melina Narvaez as Tina, and Geronimo Boisia as Ramiro. I apologize for my pronunciation there. I do not speak Spanish at all, so I probably butchered that. This photo here is the main character, Zabo. I can't just plot. The film itself is narrated by Zabo's personal blog by a teenager that he writes in every day during the year he turns 16 to express everything he experiences and feels. The film sort of opens in late 2004 with Zabo and his best friend Paul, who's pictured here. Leaving a concert, both receiving phone calls about a concert in the area that caught on fire, leaving many casualties that are called the Cornelian Fire. And then we later learn in that same sort of sequence that Paul committed suicide either due to the fire or um, because of their mental health issues. And the fire itself, the Cremanium fire, was a real event that happened, or a real tragedy that happened in Buenos Aires in 2004. It ended up killing like 94 people and sort of changing the nightlife culture and everything in that area, especially for the younger generation, which is what Sabo and Polar were a part of. So themes within the film: suicide, sexual identity, and substance use. They all play a really big role in Zabo's life at this point. Sexual identity and love. During this film, there's a lot of self-awakening and love interest for Zabo throughout the film. The first one we're sort of introduced to is Maria. It's sort of like they were like friends, and now he's like live with her. She is same taste in music, and she can make him do anything. But she's got a boyfriend, or she recently broke up with her boyfriend, and he ends up inviting her to come out with him and a bunch of his other friends, like Tomas and Fran, to this place called The Shed, where they sort of host like parties and they party and sort of have fun. Due to not really going out to like nightclubs anymore, they sort of have to create their own. During this party, Maria ends up running off with his friend Fran, and he's sort of like upset about it. We also are introduced to Ramiro during this time, where Zabo introduces him as like the perfect guy and the nice guy. Um, so he's there originally with his like friend group and Maria. So Thomas, who is one of his best friends, um, ends up sort of like taking him away from the party to sort of sort of take his mind off Maria and everything like that, and ends up making him make a list of like what qualities do you want in your ideal partner. And so they end up like hanging out together and whatnot. And a couple days pass and they're in school, and Sabo kind of figured out like, oh, what if my who meets all the criteria on my list? What if my like ideal girl isn't a girl, but is a guy? And he sort of has like this sexual awakening and starts freaking out. So he goes to his childhood friend, like Augustine, who's gay, um, for advice. And originally they hadn't talked in a while because Augustine confessed that he was in love with Zabo to Zabo, and Zabo was like, I don't feel this way, and sort of like ghosted him. But they eventually reconnect because he introduces Augustine to Paul, who is also gay, and they sort of date for a little bit before Paul commits suicide. And Augustine is the one that Zabo really only talks about Paul and like how he's sort of like not really dealing with his loss. And Augustine tries to help him by giving him this box of letters that Paul wrote him, and Zabo goes, "Well, I'm not gonna read these, so I don't need them." And so while they're talking to try to figure out Zabo's like sexual identity, Augustine goes, "Well, you really just need to like figure out if you're like actually gay or you're just in love with Tomas," and sort of pushes him to start a relationship with Ramiro, because he ends up hanging out more with Ramiro, and it sort of replaces Tomas with Ramiro to sort of try to figure out if he's really like Skyler just is in love with Tomas. And during this time, they end up going to a party, and Ramiro tries like drunkenly confess and make out with him, and then denies it the next day. And then they end up getting together and sort of having a little romance. And at the same time, Zabo meets Tina at the same party Ramiro and him sort of go to hang out with, and he ends up starting a relationship with Tina at the same time he's with Ramiro. He ends up really falling for Tina, but again, she has a boyfriend, and and he sort of writes in his blog that he's really only with Ramiro when he's like feeling alone or he really wants to like get off. So his sexual identity within the film isn't really like solidified whether he's like really likes he like is really like gay or not. Um and during this time, while he's like in this two-sided romance, Tina ends up getting pregnant, and Ramiro finds out about what Zabo's writing in his diary about him and ends up rightfully upset and sort of starts ghosting him. And then Tina gets pregnant, and she sort of pulls away to try to figure that out, and they end up losing the baby. It was never solidified whether it was his baby or her boyfriend's baby. Um, and then he goes to a different party after all of those events happen, and he like drunkenly confesses to Tomas that he's in love with him, and Tomas goes, like I'll support you and stuff, but we need space because I don't feel the same way about you. Which sort of leads to talks of depression and grief and loss and loneliness within the film. Grief and loss and depression are obviously big ones. After Paul sort of like kills himself in like the first like 10 minutes of the film, um, you see Zabo sort of trying to struggle with the grief and loss, but not very well. He sort of again sort of like ignores it and doesn't really talk to anybody about it except for Augustine. And he doesn't even really talk to Augustine. Augustine just tries to help him, by giving him the letters. And again, um, Zabo doesn't want to read them and doesn't read them. Loneliness is another big one. Zabo ends up saying in the beginning of the film that he started writing in the blog in order to feel less lonely or to tell people like, you're not alone. And throughout the whole film, he's sort of like there's a lot of Zabo getting saying that he's like lonely and he's alone and stuff like that. And then later on, you see that when he's no longer self-isolating, but everybody sort of like pulls away from him and it really badly affects him. And then pessimism, when he's really not planning for the future at all. He tells Ramiro when they're hanging out together that he's gonna die young. Like he can just tell like I'm gonna die young, and he doesn't really like think of anything about that, like about the future or anything at all. Next up, big one within the film is substance use. Obviously it's a coming of age story, so they're gonna party and drink and whatnot. Um, but Zabo kind of takes that to the extreme. There's a lot of like drunken confessions and weed and cigarettes and hanging out and partying throughout the whole film, which sort of leads up to the ending where Zabo ends up killing himself with his mom's pills and alcohol on top of the roof of his building he tries to use. There's a lot of like using alcohol and cigarettes within the film, throughout the film, for Zabo trying to cope with what's happening to him, and eventually it gets too much and he doesn't reach out for help and he ends up killing himself after he reads Paul's letters. Paul confesses that he was in love with Zabo, and we never really see, like, there was kind of like in the audience like thinks like, okay, maybe Zabo like could have been like it could have went somewhere if Paul didn't kill himself. And within his letters Paul sort of like tries to be like, okay, well, it's like you can get help, like speak out, there's a bunch of people that love you, don't do what I did. And he does what he did anyways, even though he told Tomas that he wasn't gonna kill himself because he didn't want to put his friends through what Paul put him through. But eventually Zabo just couldn't cope with it fully and ended up committing suicide. Any thoughts? The characters I thought were really well fleshed out and in depth. It was very interesting to see Zabo's sort of like inner monologue and inner narrative on the telling of his own story through that whole year up into his death. So it was very interesting to see. There were a couple like artistic, like cinematic shots, and editing sequences whenever Zabo is writing, like you see him blogging, a little like doodles and stuff pop up to signify that he is writing and being creative. And I thought that was very interesting. And then mental health awareness is another big one throughout the film. At least with the ending, there's an ending shot with Augustine and Zabo's parents sort of like agreeing to like publish his blog to try and help other people. And at the end, we get the father's narrative at the end of being like, okay, this is my son, and here's mental health awareness and stuff like that, which I thought was really interesting because throughout the film, Zabo doesn't really like connect with his parents. He doesn't open up with them at all. They're just sort of like there. And so I thought it was really interesting to sort of get like the father's narrative at the end. Overall, I thought the film was really um was good. I think I would have liked a little bit more flesh into like more of Zabo's like inner narrative. He sort of becomes an unreliable narrator in a few points, and I thought the lead up to the ending act could have been like more in depth, maybe like more thoughts and stuff, like more like telltale like signs and stuff like that. So the ending wasn't as like surprising, but overall I thought it was a good film. Um, representation wise, I don't know if it's a good representation, but I do think it's sort of like accurate in trying to figure out your thoughts and feelings on whether you're like bisexual or not. Representation obviously with Sabo sort of having a whole like love triangle, whatnot, not the best. But I do think it was accurate in terms of like trying to flesh out like the thoughts and feelings behind trying to figure out your sexuality, which I thought was really good. Um, same with a lot of like the like overall narratives on like loneliness and stuff like that. I thought it really added more depth to Zabo and whatnot. Overall, I thought it was a good film.